My brother slid one sheet of paper across our mother's kitchen table and said it the way a bank teller says next. Please, it is all handled. 6 years I had lived in our father's house as his caregiver. 6 years of medications at 7 a.m. and diaper changes at 2 in the morning. And I never took $1 for any of it. That single sheet of paper, said our father, left me nothing. Not the house I kept him alive in. Not a chair from it. Nothing. And here is what my brother did not know, as he slid it across the table. Every one of those 6 years, I had written everything down, every pill, every doctor, every visitor, every signature our father was walked out the door to make. 2 boxes went with me that morning. One held my clothes. The other held 22 blue spiral notebooks. Today, courts hire me to do one thing. I audit the people who handle other people's money, and I catch the ones who feed themselves first. 4 years after that morning, I opened a folder across a different table, looked my brother in the eye, and used his own favorite sentence on him. This time, it was true. My name is June. I am 36 years old. And if you have ever been the one your family counted on for everything, and counted as nothing, stay with me until the end of this, because the notebooks they laughed at became the thing that took it all back. Before we go further, if you believe that quiet people are not weak people, subscribe and tell me what city you are listening from. Your story might be the reason someone else keeps their notebooks. Now, let me take you back. Once, one jump, and then we walk forward together. 6 years before that morning at the kitchen table, my father had a stroke in the parking lot of the hardware store he'd shopped at for 30 years. His name was Walter. He was 68. He had worked as a machinist his whole life, the kind of man who could rebuild a lawnmower engine, but never once said the words, "I love you," out loud. He said it in other ways. He said it by showing up. When my car died in college, he drove 4 hours with a toolbox. When I got my first apartment, he rewired the ugly light fixture without being asked and left before I could thank him. The stroke took the left side of his body and most of his words. The doctors called it a major ischemic event. Plain words, a blood clot that starved part of his brain. What it meant in a kitchen, in a hallway, in a bathroom at 3 in the morning was this. My father could no longer button a shirt, walk without a frame, or reliably remember what day it was. Somebody had to move in. I want to be honest about the moment we decided, because this is where it started, and I have replayed it 1,000 times. We sat in a hospital family lounge. My mother, my brother Marcus, 40 at the time, an accountant with a firm downtown, a lake cabin, a boat, and a daughter in private school. And me, 30, single, managing the front office of a dental practice. Marcus spoke first. He always spoke first. Let's be practical. I can't. Sherry and I both work, and I handle enough already. He turned to me, and he smiled. And this is the sentence I want you to remember, because it comes back at the end of this story. June's flexible. June doesn't really have anything going on. June doesn't really have anything going on. I had a job. I had an apartment with a lease. I had a man I'd been seeing for 8 months. What I did not have was a wedding ring, a child, or a salary anyone respected. And in my family, that math rounded down to nothing. My mother nodded. It makes sense. You are the daughter. And here is my confession. Some part of me was glad. Some part of me thought, finally, a place where I am necessary. If you have ever mistaken being useful for being loved, you know exactly the trap I walked into. I said yes before anyone even pretended to ask. Within a month, I had given up my apartment, cut my job to 2 mornings a week, and moved into my childhood bedroom in my father's house on Delmore Street. The man I'd been seeing lasted 4 more months. He wasn't cruel about it. He just said, "You are never off duty." And he was right, and he left. Marcus took over what he called the business side, the pension deposits, the bills, the accounts. You do the hands-on stuff, he told me, standing in Dad's kitchen, with a banker's box of files under his arm. I'll handle the money. It is what I do. Then he said it. The first of maybe 500 times I would hear it over 6 years. It is all handled. I believed him. That is the part that still costs me sleep. For a long time, I believed him. The notebooks started 5 years before that morning, and they started small. A visiting nurse named Nothing to You. She stays a role in this story, the county rehab nurse, handed me a cheap blue spiral notebook in the first month and said, "Write down his meds and his moods. Doctors listen better to paper than to daughters." I didn't know she was handing me a weapon. Neither did she. I wrote the way I do everything, which is completely. Time, dose, meal, mood, who visited, what was said, what changed. When one notebook filled, I bought another. Same brand. Tells. Same blue. 99 cents at the drugstore on Colfax. Marcus saw them stacked on the counter once. Maybe a year in, he picked one up, flipped it, and laughed. Not a mean laugh. Worse. The laugh you give a child's drawing. Look at you. Little court reporter. He set it down without reading a word. Remember that. He set it down without reading a word. Life narrowed the way water freezes. Slowly, then all at once. 2 mornings a week at the dental office became none, because Dad couldn't be alone that long. My savings account went from $11,000 to $4,000. Then, to a number I stopped checking. I asked Marcus once, carefully, over the phone, whether the household account could cover a caregiver stipend. Plain words, a small monthly payment for the person doing the caring. Something agencies charge families thousands for. There was a pause. I can still hear. Then, that tone. Calm. Reasonable. Almost. Concerned. June. He is your father. Are you really asking to be paid to love your dad? I said. No. I said, of course not. I hung up and stood in the kitchen with my face hot, feeling like I'd done something shameful by asking to survive. If you've ever been made to feel greedy for needing groceries, comment the word unpaid below. I read every comment on these videos, and I promise you, there are more of us than you think. Here is what I didn't know yet. And stay with me, because this is where the story stops being sad and starts being criminal. 4 years before that morning at the kitchen table. So about 2 years into my time in that house. My father's neurologist wrote a letter. I was in the exam room when she dictated it. March 3rd. She wrote that my father, following a second smaller stroke that winter, was no longer capable of managing his financial or legal affairs, and she recommended the family take, quote, appropriate protective steps. I wrote it in the notebook that night. March 3rd. Doctor says, Dad can't handle money or legal decisions anymore. Marcus says, he'll take care of the paperwork. It is all handled. 11 days later, Marcus took Dad to lunch. It was a Tuesday. He showed up at 11:30 a.m. in a good suit, which I noticed because it was a Tuesday and lunch, with Dad meant a diner and a bib. He said, Father, son time, Junie. Take your afternoon. I remember being grateful. I remember thinking, he is finally stepping up. I went and got my hair cut for the first time in 5 months. They came back at 3 p.m. Dad was tired and quiet, and when I helped him wash up for dinner, there was a smudge of green ink on the side of his right hand, the side that drags across a page when you sign your name. Dad hadn't been able to write more than his own signature since the second stroke, and even that took him half a minute and all of his focus. I asked Marcus, "What is the ink from?" He was already putting on his coat. He smiled at me the way you smile at a toll booth. "Insurance stuff. Renewals. It is all handled." I wrote it down. March 14th. Lunch with Marcus. Green ink. Right hand. Insurance renewals. Dad exhausted. Wouldn't eat. I want to stop here and tell you what that green ink was. Because you've earned it. And because I didn't learn it for 4 more years. Notaries. The people whose official stamp is supposed to prove you really showed up and really signed. Use ink pads for their seals. And their journals. That green smudge was my father's hand being pressed onto a notary journal. At a signing appointment Marcus booked, 11 days after a doctor put in writing that our father could no longer legally make those decisions. The document my father signed that Tuesday was called a durable power of attorney. Plain words, a paper that hands one person the legal right to act as another person, sign as them, spend as them, decide as them. From that afternoon on, in the eyes of every bank in this state, my brother's signature was my father's signature. I called it the signing paper. Later, when I finally held it, remember that nickname. The signing paper. It is the first of 3 documents. This whole story turns on. That detail matters later. All of it matters later. Stay with me. 3 years before that morning, the money started to move. And the first person it moved away from was me. My car, a 14-year-old sedan, I used for every pharmacy run, every emergency room visit, every 3 a.m. drive, needed a new alternator. Plain words. The part that keeps the battery alive. $310. I had $200 to my name. I called Marcus, and I did the thing I had promised myself I'd never do again. I asked, "The car's not for me." I said, "It is Dad's ambulance, basically." That calm voice, that concerned voice. "June, I have a duty here. Dad's money is for Dad's care. The estate can't be a piggy bank. Dad's money is for Dad's care." Hold on to that sentence, because I am about to show you what my brother thought Dad's care meant, and I want you to hear how I found out, because it wasn't clever. It was laundry. That November, still 3 years before that morning, Dad had a fall, and the hospital needed his recent bank statements for a benefits application. Marcus was at a conference. For once, the bank had to deal with me, the emergency contact, standing there with Dad's identification and a hospital letter. The teller printed 6 months of statements for the household account, folded them into an envelope, and I read them that night at the kitchen table while Dad slept. With a notebook open beside me like always, there was a withdrawal on the 15th of every month. Same amount, $1,850. The memo line said, "Management fee, $1,850 a month for managing 1 pension, 1 savings account, and 1 paid-off house." While the person doing the feeding, bathing, lifting, and midnight panic, part of Dad's care was told that asking for an alternator made her a piggy bank raider. I didn't scream. I want you to understand something about me, because it is the engine of this whole story. When something breaks in me, I don't get loud. I get precise. I copied every line of those statements into the notebook, dates and amounts, in blue ink, at the kitchen table, and then I made Dad's tea for the morning, and went to bed. I did ask Marcus about it. Once. Christmas. 3 years before, that morning, I waited until the dishes were done and asked, quietly, what a management fee was. He didn't flinch. That is the thing about my brother that took me years to understand. He is not a screamer or a schemer in a dark room. He is a system. He had an answer the way vending machines have snacks. Preloaded, wrapped, room temperature, professional fiduciary compensation. He said, plain words. He was paying himself a salary for handling Dad's money, at a rate he set, approved by no one, signed off by a power of attorney. Our father inked 11 days, after a doctor said he couldn't. It is standard. June. I'd charge a client more. Honestly, Dad's getting a family discount. He smiled. My mother, drying a glass, said, your brother gave up his Saturdays for that paperwork. His Saturdays. I slept in a monitor's static for 6 years, and he got a salary for his Saturdays. If you've ever watched a family do math where your years count for less than someone else's afternoons, you already know why I stopped arguing at that table. There is no argument to win. There is only evidence to keep. So I kept it. And I kept sitting where I always sat at those holiday dinners. Which brings me to something small I need you to remember. My mother's dining table sat 6. There were 7 of us with Marcus's family there. Every year, one person carried in the folding chair from the garage, the brown one with the taped leg, and set it at the corner of the table, half behind the china cabinet. And every year, that person was me, and that chair was mine. Nobody assigned it. Nobody had to. Some seats in a family are decided so long ago that gravity does the rest. I ate 6 Christmases on that folding chair. Remember, the chair. I want to pause on his sentence for a second, because some of you have a Marcus, and you need to understand how the sentence works before I show you how it dies. It is all handled. Say it out loud. Notice what it does. It answers a question you didn't ask, and it forbids the one you did. Relatives loved it. Aunts on the phone would say, how is your dad's situation? And I'd hear my mother in the next room. Marcus has it all handled. He is so good with these things. And the call would move on to weather. The sentence was a door that closed softly. Every time, on every room I was standing in. For 6 years, the only place that door couldn't close was a 99-cent notebook. Because paper doesn't get tired of your questions. And paper is never told it is making things ugly. If you have a sentence like that in your family, the one that ends conversations instead of answering them, start writing down every time you hear it, and the date. You are not being paranoid. You are keeping minutes. Now, 2 years before that morning, the second document happened. And this time, I signed for it myself, not the document. The envelope. A courier came to the door on a June afternoon, while Dad napped. An overnight envelope addressed to Marcus, at our father's address, from a company called Keystone Signing Services. I signed the courier's screen, set the envelope on the hall table, and wrote it in the notebook. Because, by then, writing things down was just who I was. June 18th, overnight envelope, for Marcus. Keystone Signing Services. He picked it up same evening. Didn't open it here. 2 days later, a woman in a gray blazer came to the house at 1 p.m. Marcus introduced her as a colleague. She and Marcus sat with Dad at the dining table for 20 minutes with the door to the den closed while I was told warmly that this would bore me, and maybe Dad would love a milkshake after. Through the door, I heard the murmur of reading aloud, and then quiet, and then chairs. When she left, she shook my hand at the door. Her hands smelled like ink. Dad was asleep 9 minutes after they left, on the side of his right hand. Faint, but there. Green. Notebook. June 20th. Gray blazer woman, 1 p.m., 20 minutes. Den door closed. Ink smell. Green smudge again. Right hand. Marcus says, estate housekeeping. It is all handled. I didn't know it yet, but the paper signed behind that door was the second of the 3 documents. The one I'd later call the rewrite, and the woman in the gray blazer had a problem she didn't know I would one day be paid to find. Stay with me. This is where it turns. 8 months before that morning, my father gave me the last gift he ever gave anyone, and he did it with 4 words. By then, the strokes and the slow fog that followed them had taken most of his sentences. Good days. He could name me. Bad days. He called me by his sister's name, or just the girl, and I answered to all of it. Because love answers. It was an October evening. I was doing what I did every evening at 8 p.m., sitting beside his bed with that day's notebook, writing the day down. Meds, meals, mood. He watched me. He'd been quiet since dinner. Then his good hand came off the blanket and closed around my wrist, and his grip was still a machinist's grip. I want you to know that. The strokes never got his grip, and he pulled me an inch closer and said, clear as a bell, clear as 30 years ago. You write it down, Junie. 4 words. Words, I said. I do, Dad, every day. He nodded once, like a foreman signing off on a weld, and let go, and drifted. And that was the last full sentence my father ever said to me. I used to think he meant the pills. I don't think that anymore. I think somewhere behind the fog, a man who'd signed things he couldn't read, in rooms he didn't choose, with green ink on his hand, knew one thing for certain about his daughter. She keeps the record, and the record was the only inheritance he still had the power to leave me. He died in January, 5 days into the new year, in his sleep, in the bed I had turned him in every night for 6 years. I was holding his hand. It was 4:12 in the morning. I know, because I wrote it down. I cried that morning, alone, in the hallway outside his room, on the floor with my back against the wall. Before I called anyone, I want to tell you now, so you are not waiting for it. That is the only time I cry in this entire story. Everything after this, I did dry-eyed, not because the tears ran out, because I put them somewhere they could work. The funeral was on a Saturday. Marcus gave a beautiful eulogy. I am not being bitter. It was genuinely beautiful, and that is its own kind of terrible. Watching a room full of people wipe their eyes for the son who visited 11 times in the final year. I counted. Of course, I counted. I have the notebook. And then came the Tuesday after the funeral, the 0 point of my whole life. That morning, my mother called it a family meeting to go over things. 10 a.m., her kitchen table. I got there at 9:50. There was coffee in the good cups. There was a legal pad in front of Marcus, and a single manila folder, squared to the table edge like a place setting. No lawyer. Remember that. A reading of a trust with no lawyer in the room, run by the one person the trust made rich. Marcus waited until my mother sat. Then he took one sheet out of the folder and slid it across the table to me. And if you've been with me from the beginning, you already know what he said. He said it the way a bank teller says next, please. It is all handled. The sheet was a summary. He'd typed it himself. Bullet points. The family trust, plain words. The legal container that held Dad's house. Pension savings, everything. Had been amended 2 years back. Updated was Marcus's word. Under the updated trust, Marcus was sole trustee and sole beneficiary. The house on Delmore Street would be sold. Our mother would live with the proceeds invested under Marcus's management. And there, third bullet from the bottom, in my brother's own font, the sentence they had written about 6 years of my life. In recognition of June's residence in the home rent. Free, no further distribution is made to her. Rent. Free. 6 years. 2,190 nights. Give or take the leap year. Every one of them on call. That was the invoice they handed me back. I had lived rent-free. I looked at my mother. This is the part that took me longest to make peace with. So I'll say it plainly for anyone sitting in a kitchen, like that one right now. I looked at my mother, and I waited for her to say something, and she stirred her coffee and said, "Your father wanted things simple, June. Don't make this ugly. Don't make this ugly. Not. This is wrong. Not. She was here every night. Ugly. The only sin in my family was never the knife. It was mentioning the knife. I asked one question. I ask it quietly, and I asked it because I already knew the answer. And I wanted it said out loud in that kitchen. When was the trust updated? Marcus didn't check any paper. Couple years ago. Dad and I took care of it properly. There was a notary. I thought about a gray blazer, and an ink smell, and a green smudge on a hand that could barely hold a fork. Okay, I said. That is all I said. Okay. My brother heard surrender. My mother heard peace. What it actually was. And if a quiet person has ever told you okay in that tone, I hope you ran. Was a door closing and a different door opening. He wanted the house key back by the end of the month. I gave it to him right there. I stood up, took the key off my ring, and set it on his legal pad, on top of his bullet points, and I watched him relax, because to Marcus, that key was the last loose end. He never once asked what was in my boxes. I was out of my father's house by 10:40 a.m. That Friday, 2 boxes on the passenger seat of a car with a bad alternator, 1 box of clothes, 1 box holding 22 blue spiral notebooks, 6 years in order, dated, in my handwriting, with a green ink smudge noted twice. Little court reporter, he said it as a joke. I drove away with it as a job description. 6 weeks after I left, I was sleeping on a friend's futon and answering job listings. And one of them changed everything. Stay with me. This is where she comes in. The one person this story gave me. The listing was for a file clerk at a law firm downtown. Probate and estate litigation. Plain words. The lawyers' families hire when somebody dies, and the money starts behaving strangely. $21 an hour. I was 32 years old with a 6-year hole in my resume, and I almost didn't apply, because what do you put in that hole? Under experience. I finally wrote 1 line. Managed all daily care, medication, scheduling, and records for a stroke patient for 6 years. Complete written documentation, maintained throughout. The woman who interviewed me was named Renata, senior paralegal, 30 years in probate. Silver hair in a knot. Reading glasses pushed up on her head that she never once used to read. She looked at that 1 line on my resume, longer than she looked at me. Then she said, "Complete written documentation. What does complete mean to you?" I told her, time, dose, meal, mood, visitors, what was said, what changed. 22 notebooks. Renata took her glasses off her head, folded them, and looked at me for a long moment. And then she said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. The people who erase you always keep records too. Honey, they just never imagine you'll learn to read them. I started the following Monday. I want to give you one small scene from that first year, because revenge stories skip this part. and it is the part that saves lives. My second paycheck. I took the car in and paid for a new alternator. $340 by then. Prices had gone up. I paid in full with my own card from my own account, and the mechanic, a role, not a name, a kid with his cap on backwards, said, "You want the old part?" And I said yes. I don't fully know why. It sat on my windowsill for 2 years, a dead chunk of metal, the size of a coffee can. And every morning, it said the same thing to me. Nobody gets to tell you that keeping yourself alive is greed. Ever again. Renata never asked about my family. Not once. In the first year, she'd just slide files onto my desk, real cases, other people's Marcuses, and say, "Read this one. Tell me where it smells." And I'd find it, the backdated signature, the fee that grew every January, the amendment that always appeared within weeks of a doctor's letter, because that is the pattern. That is the actual national pattern. The vultures circle the diagnosis. The 10th or 11th time I found it, Renata looked at me over the folder and said, "You know you are not just good at this." I said, "I had 6 years of homework." She said, "No, honey, you had 6 years of witness prep. Here is the rebuild, and I'll give it to you the way it actually felt." Which is fast, because when you finally have a direction, years compress. Days. No, days were long. But years, the years flew. File clerk to paralegal student. Nights. Community college. 18 months. Paralegal to probate paralegal on Renata's team, where I learned what the words really meant. Trustee. Fiduciary duty. Plain words. The legal obligation to handle someone's money for their benefit and never your own. The single most broken promise in America. Undue. Influence. Capacity. I read court files the way other people read crime novels. Except I already knew the killer and his font. And then the third year. The turn I didn't see coming. Our state courts keep a roster of people they appoint when a trust or an estate smells wrong. A neutral examiner who goes in, audits the books, and reports to the judge. The work is picky, patient, and built entirely on documentation. Renata put my name in front of the roster committee. Herself. Her recommendation letter was 1 paragraph. I've never read it. I've Towin. She only told me the last line. She trains her whole life for this and doesn't know it. I passed the fiduciary licensing exam on the first sitting. I hung a license on a wall of an office, barely bigger than Dad's pantry, and now, when a family somewhere in this county suspects that the brother handling Mom's money has been feeding himself first, a judge sends them me. I audit trustees. I catch the Marcuses of the world for a living. Sit with that for a second, because I still do. Now, before you ask the question, let me answer it, because it matters more than anything else in this story. I never touched my own family's case in any official role, not one filing, not one phone call, wearing that badge. The day I decided to move, I walked 2 floors up in my own firm, retained a litigation attorney, and became what I had every legal right to be. Walter's daughter. An heir with standing, plain words. A person the law recognizes as entitled to ask question. Everything you are about to hear was done in the open, on the record. By the rules. That was the whole point. Marcus broke a system. He thought no one in the family could read. I didn't have to break anything. I just had to read. 4 years and 2 months after that morning at my mother's kitchen table, I sat down at a conference table with my attorney and did what I do. I built the folder. 3 documents. I promised you 3, and here they are, 1 page at a time. Document 1. The neurologist's letter. March 3rd, 4 years and 2 months before Dad died. On letterhead, signed, in his medical file, which his estate, meaning his heirs, meaning me, had every right to obtain. One sentence in the middle of it. And I want you to hear it the way a judge hears it. The patient is no longer capable of managing his financial or legal affairs. There is a date on that letter. Keep it in your hand. Document 2. The signing paper. The durable power of attorney that made Marcus's signature into Dad's signature. Recorded, stamped, dated March 14th, 11 days after the letter. 11 days after a doctor put in writing that my father could not legally hand anyone that power. My father was taken to lunch in a good suit and handed it to Marcus anyway. I didn't need to remember the lunch. I didn't need to remember the green ink. Notebook 14, page 31. In my handwriting, dated that same night. Doctor's letter 1 page, notebook the next, in a plastic sleeve. Side by side, 11 days. You don't need a law degree. You need a calendar. Document 3. The rewrite. The trust amendment from that June afternoon. The gray blazer. The closed den door. The paper that made Marcus everything, and me, a bullet point. It was notarized. Just like Marcus said, there was a notary. And this is the part where 4 years of picky, patient training walked back into my family's kitchen. Every notary in this state has a commission, plain words, a license with a start date and an end date. And it is public. Anyone can look it up in about 90 seconds. I looked up the gray blazer's commission on a Tuesday afternoon, with a cup of coffee going cold next to my keyboard. Her commission had expired the December before she stamped my father's trust. I read it 3 times. I checked the middle initial. I checked the county. I printed the page, and then I sat very still in my little office while the coffee finished going cold, because I want to be honest with you about what that moment felt like. And it wasn't triumph. It was vertigo. 4 years of wondering if I was the crazy one, the greedy one, the vindictive one. My mother's whole vocabulary. And the answer had been sitting in a public database the entire time. Free. 90 seconds away. Waiting for exactly one person on Earth to know that it mattered. And go look. That is what they count on. By the way, not that the proof doesn't exist. That the erased person will never be taught it. Exists. Stay with me. Because we're about to walk it into a courtroom. Expired. 6 months. Expired. Which meant the stamp on the rewrite. The little seal whose entire job is to prove the signing was real and proper, was itself not real and not proper. The one document that disinherited me was wearing a dead seal, and writing in that same folder, 1 page further, the ledger. Bank statements my attorney obtained the lawful way, through the court. The management fee, $1,850 a month. It ran for 46 months. $85,100, paid by my sleeping father to my brother's checking account. That is not a fee. That is a teacher's salary. That is 6 years of the rent I supposedly owed. That is an alternator, 274 times. For the daughter who was told the estate wasn't a piggy bank. I sat back from that folder, and I did not cry, and I did not smile. I squared the pages to the table edge, the way my brother likes his folders. And then I told my attorney I was ready. We filed the petition on a Thursday morning. Plain words. We formally asked the probate court to look at the trust, throw out the rewrite and the signing paper, remove Marcus as trustee, and make him give back what he took. Every page of it public. Every step of it by the book. No ambush. No leak. No lucky accident. The system Marcus hid behind has a front door, and I knocked on it. Marcus called me 9 times in the first week. I answered none of them. His voicemails went, in order through the whole catalog. Amused. Junie, I think some paperwork crossed wires. Call me. Then, managerial. June, this is going to cost the estate money, which hurts Mom, which I assume is not your goal. Then, finally, message 9. The first honest sentence in 4 years, delivered in the voice of a man discovering the stove is hot. What do you want? I texted back one line. My attorney's name and phone number. Nothing else. If you have ever wanted to know what 6 years of swallowed words sounds like, it sounds like a text message with a phone number in it. The court ordered mediation. First, that is standard, plain words. A settlement meeting with a neutral referee. One last chance to fix it quietly before a judge fixes it loudly. Conference room. On the 4th floor. Long table. Marcus arrived in the good suit, with his own lawyer, and with our mother, which was a choice. She sat beside him. Of course, she sat beside him. Some seats are decided so long ago that gravity does the rest. I came with my attorney, one folder, and I am just going to tell you because you've come this far with me. Notebook 14 in my bag. I didn't need it. Every page that mattered was copied, certified, exhibited. I brought it the way other people bring a photograph of the person they're fighting for. The mediator asked if I had a settlement position. I said I had 11 sentences. I read them from a single page, flat, dated, numbered, in the voice I use for court reports. And I am going to give you the spine of them now. 1. On March 3rd of that year, Dad's neurologist certified in writing that he could no longer manage his legal or financial affairs. 2. 11 days later, on March 14th, a power of attorney was executed in Marcus's favor. 3. I documented that outing and my father's condition that evening in a notebook entry, written the same night. 4. I attend. 2 years later, a trust amendment was executed, making Marcus sole beneficiary. 5. The notary commission on that amendment had expired 6 months earlier, rendering the notarization invalid. 6. Beginning 3 years before Dad's death, the trust paid Marcus a monthly management fee of $1,850. 7. Those fees total $85,100. 8. During the same period, requests for care related expenses were refused. 9. State law allows a court to surcharge a trustee. Plain words, make him repay out of his own pocket, and to double damages taken in bad faith. 10. We are asking the court to void both documents, remove Marcus as trustee, and restore the original trust, under which our father's estate is divided equally between his 2 children, with the fees repaid. And 11. I looked up from the page for the first time at my brother, for the last sentence, which was not in my attorney's draft. 11. It is all handled. Nobody said anything. For 11 seconds, I counted. Of course, I counted. Marcus's lawyer asked for a recess. Through the glass wall, I watched my brother read the notary lookup printout twice, and I watched the exact moment his face did the thing my face must have done at Mom's kitchen table 4 years earlier. The moment the floor turns out to be paper. My mother spoke to me once, in the hallway, by the water fountain. She said, "He is your brother. This will destroy him. Is that what you want? To destroy this family?" I had waited 36 years to be asked what I want. I said, "Mom, the family was destroyed at your kitchen table. I am just filing the report." And I went back inside. There was no settlement that day, because Marcus was still Marcus, and systems don't apologize, they appeal. So, it went to the judge, and the judge did what judges do when you hand them a calendar, a dead seal, and a ledger. Here is what the ruling said, stripped of the Latin, and I want you to hear every consequence in the same flat voice he used on me for 6 years. Because the flatness is the point. The trust amendment, the rewrite, void, invalid notarization, executed when our father lacked capacity, procured by undue influence, gone, as if it never existed, the power of attorney, the signing paper, void from the start, same grounds, which meant every act Marcus performed under it was the act of a man with no authority at all. The management fees, repaid in full, with interest, and because the judge found bad faith, surcharged double under state law. $85,100 became $170,200. Owed personally by Marcus to our father's estate. He sold the boat. He listed the lake cabin in the spring. I know because sales like that are public record, and reading public records is, as you know, my whole entire job. And one more consequence I did not ask for, but the law did. Judicial findings of fiduciary bad faith don't stay in the courthouse when the fiduciary holds a professional license. The finding was reported to the State Board of Accountancy. My brother, the accountant, spent the next year explaining to his own regulators why a court concluded he couldn't be trusted with a family checkbook. His firm's website quietly removed the words trust and estate services from his biography. I didn't do that. He did that. 11 days at a time, $1,850 at a time, for years. I just read it out loud. The notary was reported too. Turns out the rewrite wasn't the only document she'd stamped on a dead commission. That one rippled into other families' cases, other people's rewrites. Somewhere out there are strangers who got their inheritances corrected because a woman in a gray blazer once shook hands with the wrong little court reporter. Now let me tell you what happened after, because they don't go quietly, and you deserve the release of hearing it. Marcus escalated. First, the calls, which I left unanswered. Then, he came to my office. My actual office, the one with my license on the wall, on a Wednesday at 4 p.m., and stood in the little lobby telling our family's story to my part-time receptionist until I came out. He'd rehearsed something. I could tell, because it opened with Junie and a smile, and it had bullet points. Family. Dad's memory. Lawyers. Bleeding us both. We can still fix this between us. I let him finish. Then, I said the one cold line I'd saved for 4 years. And I said it the way a bank teller says next, please. Marcus, I don't take meetings without documentation. And I went back into my office and closed the door, and through it, I heard the sound every erased person dreams about. Nothing. No. Combat. Just a man in a good suit standing in a lobby, discovering that the flexible sister with nothing going on was the appointment he couldn't get. My mother sent emails, long ones. I read them all, because I read everything. It is the job. Not one contained the word sorry. They contained the words ashamed, ugliness, vindictive, and, this is my favorite, I keep it the way other people keep concert tickets. After everything this family did for you, she still has my number. The phone that never brings an apology also never brings an attack. I haven't already filed under previously reviewed. I did not get my family back. I want to say that plainly, because I know some of you are waiting for the doorway scene. The rain, the hug, it doesn't come. My mother chose her seat at that table decades ago, and Marcus was born in his. What I got back was smaller than a family. and bigger than one. I got my name on a door, my Saturdays, my father's house. Because under the restored trust, half of everything was mine, and I bought out the other half at fair market value. On the record, appraised, clean. I sleep in my childhood home. I own the kitchen. I was told I'd lived in rent-free, and I got one thread I didn't expect. Marcus's daughter, my niece, 16 now, and no, I won't say her name. She has earned her privacy. Took a bus across town last fall and knocked on my door. She'd read the court file herself, 16 years old, and she read the whole file. She stood on my father's porch and said, "I wanted to hear your side." And I said, "You just read it. My side is the exhibits." And she laughed, and Lord, she has Dad's laugh. And she comes by now, some Sundays, and we fix things in his garage. Last month, I taught her to rewire a light fixture. She wrote the steps down, without being told. Some things skip a generation. Some things are just love, wearing work gloves. If this story is landing somewhere tender, if you were the flexible one, the one with nothing going on, the folding chair at your own family's table, do two things for me. Subscribe, because I have more of these files than I have Sundays, and comment one word, unpaid, so the next person scrolling past at 2 in the morning sees a wall of those and understands they were never the only one. Here is how I'll leave you. Last spring, before the first family dinner I ever hosted in that house, Renata came, my niece came. 2 neighbors who checked on Dad for years came. I went out to the garage for extra seating, and there it was, the folding chair. Brown, taped leg, still leaning where chairs like that lean, in the shadow of the shelf. Somebody had moved it over from Mom's garage, years ago, with a load of Dad's tools, and never noticed. I stood there a long moment. Then I carried it in, and I set it at the head of my table, and I sat in it, at the head in my house. And from there I watched people I chose pass my father's dishes to each other. The chair didn't change. Chairs never do. What changed is who decides where it goes. The corner seat behind the china cabinet was never about furniture. It was about a family that needed one member to stay foldable, collapsible, storable, brought out when useful, put away when done. I am done being storable. The notebooks are in a fireproof box, in Dad's den now. All 22. Next to a 23rd I still write in every night, out of habit or out of honor. I've stopped needing to know which. Time, mood, who visited, what was said, what changed. Everything. Dad. I write everything down. They called it a diary. A court called it evidence. I call it what it always was. The only member of my family that never once looked away from me. My brother built 6 years. On one lazy sentence, it is all handled. He meant, don't look. He was betting his whole life that the person he'd folded up and put in the corner would never learn where to look, or how, or that looking could be a license, a career, a courtroom, a house, a Sunday table with his own daughter laughing at it. It is all handled, Marcus. You just never asked. Who kept the minutes?